Hello, I'm Ryan Jones, and welcome to this part of the Housing Opportunity through Modernization Act of 2016 training on the PIH notice. In this part of the training, we'll cover Attachment D. The attachment covers the PBV program limitation 10% increase for eligible units. In this training, I will discuss the exception categories, the impact on existing contracts, and submission requirements. Under HOTMA, a PHA may project base an additional 10% of its ACC authorized units above the 20% program limit, provided the additional units fall into one of the eligible exception categories. The 20% program limit is discussed in Attachment C of the PIH notice and the complementary training video. As noted on the slide, there are 4 exception categories: units made available for homeless, units made available for veterans, units providing supportive housing to persons with disabilities or to elderly persons, and units located in a census tract with a poverty rate of 20% or less. The units eligible for inclusion in this 10% exception category may be distributed among one, all, or a combination of the categories as long as the total number of units does not exceed the 10% cap. For example, if 10% of ACC authorized units is 100, the PHA may project base 50 units for homeless families and 50 units provided supportive housing to persons with disabilities or elderly persons. Let's look at the homeless exception category. As noted on the slide, these are units that are specifically made available to house individuals and families who meet the definition of homeless under Section 103 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. A point of clarification: PHAs may limit units to be covered under the exception category to a specific subset of homeless. For example, family homelessness, or those fleeing domestic violence that have no other residence and lack resources to obtain other permanent housing. Units that are specifically made available to house families that are comprised of or include a veteran are accepted. In this case, a veteran is defined as an individual who has served in the United States Armed Forces. As noted on the slide, PHAs may further define veteran. In this example, the PHA has chosen to include in its definition of veteran an individual with an other than dishonorable discharge status who is ineligible for health care provided through the Veterans Health Administration. This eligibility may be verified through policies established by the PHA. Pay attention to the last bullet of the slide. HUD award vouchers specifically designated for PBV out of HUD-VASH appropriated funds are not included in this exception, as they are already excluded from the program cap. This exclusion is discussed in Attachment F of the notice. Moving on to supportive services exception. To be accepted, these units must provide supportive housing to persons with disabilities or to elderly persons. As noted on the slide, supportive housing means that a project that makes supportive services available for all of the assisted families in the project and provide a range of services tailored to the needs of the residents occupying such housing. The notice provides a non-exhaustive list of services that may be included, some of which are reproduced on the slide, such as case management, child care, or housekeeping aid. A PHA's administrative plan must include the types of services offered to families for a project to qualify for the exception and the extent to which such services will be provided. For example, the length of time services will be provided to the family and the frequency and depth of the services. The services do not have to be provided by the owner or on site, but must be reasonably available to the families receiving the assistance. Participation in the services cannot be required. Continuing on this exception category, with the exception of an assisted living facility, tenants may not be required to pay for the services being offered. As noted on the slide, non-payment of such charges by the family is not grounds for termination of tenancy. In the case of an assisted living facility receiving PBV assistance, owners may charge families for the meals or supportive services. These charges are not included in the rent to owner or calculation of reasonable rent. Moving on to the poverty rate exception. To qualify, the units must be located in a census tract with a poverty rate of 20% or less, as determined in the most recent American Community Survey 5-year estimates. A project that qualifies for the increased project cap at the time of contract execution continues to qualify for the exception for the length of the contract, regardless of changes in poverty rate for the census tract in which the project is located. The notice in Attachment D provides a link where census tracts with poverty rates of 20% or less are located, including corresponding instructions. It may be helpful to keep a record of the poverty rate on file. I would like to note that these 4 exception categories are separate and distinct from the exceptions to the income mixing requirement, which limits the number and percentage of units within a particular project to which PBV assistance may be attached. This is discussed in Attachment E of the notice. For PBV units in one of the 4 categories I just discussed to be covered by the 10% exception category authority, the units must be covered under a HAP contract that was first executed on or after April 18, 2017, the effective date of the January 18, 2017 HAPMA implementation notice. Units added on or after April 18, 2017 through an amendment of a HAP contract that was first executed prior to April 2017 are not eligible for the exception. A PHA does not have to have met the 20% program cap before it designates eligible units for the 10% exception category. An example of this is included in the notice. Where HUD receives a proposal from a PHA that exceeds either the 20% cap or the 10% exception from the program cap, the proposal will be rejected. In the case where the PHA has not exceeded the combined 30% limit, the PHA may correct its proposal by moving units from one category to the other, as long as only eligible units are counted toward the 10% exception from the program cap. PHAs that will be adding PBV units under this exception authority must identify the exception category for which the additional units will be project-based and the specific number of units that qualify under the exception category in its transmittal of the submission requirement described in Attachment C of the notice. Appendix 1 of the notice has information on calculating the number of voucher units that may be project-based. Thank you for your attention, and we'll now move on to the next session.